Whatever will be, will be.
Hey, so welcome back to the Trampled Underfoot Podcast show, starring Mark Lindsay and co-starring Eloy Escagedo.
Why? What made you laugh about that?
Because I used
It's
the
the
word
truth.
because I used the word starring, and I used the word co-starring for me, and you didn't correct it. So obviously, there's a hierarchy going on here.
No, co-starring means we're both the same and on an equal playing field.
Sub co-starring.
No, see, that would be with or to make you feel special. Also starring.
I saw this. I've been. We were before the thing. This thing that we're doing now, which is called a show live. We
Mhm.
were. We. I was. I'm sorry. We were talking about something, and I just remembered something that connects with what you were saying, which is earlier last week I ran into a channel because we were talking, folks, just before we come up on here, that a lot of channels have repetitiveness or they download things from our archival footage and they'll place it on their channels, and there's a lot of repetitiveness going on in this and that. And we were talking about that whole theme. For better or worse, just talking about that. But it reminded me now for some reason, like when the light sign went red for some reason, Mark, it reminded me I ran into a channel and I started watching it back in the day. They had the Abbott and Costello show,
Mhm.
and there's a channel that posts those. And as I'm working with the things that I work on, I put it in the background, and I can't help but to squirrel back and forth because I hear Abbott, or Costello going Abbott, and so I go back into the thing. But I found it so entertaining and stuff. The access to that we wouldn't have had years ago.
And okay, the discussion we were having was the ability to lose time online and
Yeah,
how some websites are just a time sink. And the
yeah,
minute you go to that website, bring a lunch and a bedroll because you're going to be there for the day.
yeah,
And the Internet Archive is one of those for me because I can get on there and find movies or old serials or old TV shows or old time radio shows.
yeah,
And just next thing I know, the sun's going down and I haven't done a thing. It's real easy to do.
yeah,
Then we got into the discussion about what a lot of channels did back in the day was they would go to the Internet Archive and download all of the movies they could get that were in public domain, post them on a YouTube channel and monetize it. Well,
yeah,
YouTube decided that too many people were doing that, so they stopped allowing monetization of any new channels. They didn't take away any monetization, they didn't ban those kind of channels. They just said, we've already got too many people doing this. It's repetitive content. We're not going to approve monetization on any more of these channels.
yeah.
And a lot of people have stopped doing that just because YouTube was right. There were so many people doing it, the market was flooded, and it just wasn't worth their time.
Not lucrative enough.
Yeah, it just, it wasn't lucrative at all.
Yeah,
So,
there's so many options. Like how many, right, of the
yeah,
same thing?
exactly. And I'm that way that you were just talking about with Abbott and Costello is I can put on an old radio show, old time radio, knowing that I don't have to watch it. I can just listen to it while I'm doing something else. The problem therein being is I find that I'm getting into the radio show and I'm not getting anything done. I'm just sitting there listening because I'll be typing along like on a word processor document, and a word will jump out at me in the radio script, and I'll type that word, and I'm like, "What are you doing? Back up,
Yeah,
delete, get rid of it." And pretty soon I'm not doing a thing. So I can't do that. I have to avoid sites like that at all cost, unless I'm researching something. So
so this whole thing actually in a way kind of ties into I've been uh, as we use the internet, I've been doing research and stuff, and I ended up in an area um because it's a branch off of a main road that I was taking. And I do that a lot, and I've got a great story Um, I just learned about it within the past 3 or so hours. So I have a broad, like, I can consume information pretty good. So it's a story I'd like to share with you guys, and it happens to do with early New Orleans. It's an American story, but it's quite complicated in the amount of branches that occur, side roads that occur, and the story has at least three themes that I picked up on. Um, but there's not three themes; it's a multitude of themes, and I find it just fascinating. I'd never considered these things because I'd never heard about it. So I want to share this with you. And I have opinions that have not fully formed on the events that occurred during New Orleans in the late 1890s. Okay, I have opinions that are not yet properly formed, but I think that you guys will find some value in it, maybe a little, maybe a lot, I don't know. So I'll share with it, and I'll be as concise as I can, and I don't know how well I'm going to be able to, but it's something. It's something. And so I'll reserve my any judgment calls, if Mark is interested, or whatever the case in that dialogue, because I don't know, because I can't necessarily or want to do that sort of analysis now. I just want to lay out the foundations as best I can. So I'll do that and see where we go from there. Does that sound good to you
Sounds
guys?
good to me. Sounds good to me.
Okay, so going back, I'm gonna be as very specific and to the point as possible, and then later we can, if need be, expand or think about it or whatever. So in the 1890s, there was an event that occurred that was just a tremor, or a seismic tremor that occurred to a group of people in Louisiana, in New Orleans. But before I get to that event, and it was actually, it was actually a mob coming up on Old West style, because we're talking 1890s, a mob coming up and doing Old West justice, okay, on a group of people. But the story leading up to it is amazing. So I'll start with this. David Hennessy, from an Irish Catholic family. His father was David Hennessy Sr., and he was a Union soldier during the Civil War.
Okay.
And so eventually he ends up, after the Civil War, or just at the tail end, they go into New Orleans, and the Union Army takes hold of it, and he forms part of a cavalry in New Orleans, right? That's guarding the place and whatnot. You still have your opposing factions that have lost,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not very, quite, let's say, happy about what has unfolded, because it means everything from economy dwindling for people, their status in society, their way of life, just everything uprooted and whatnot. So Mr. Hennessy, David Hennessy, he's in that cavalry, but eventually he ends up serving for the governor as a sort of observing or guarding. My dog is tapping all over the place, annoying. He forgive me for that. He goes into the role of metropolitan policeman for the governor, and they keep an eye on the population, making sure that things don't, build up again and whatnot. And this is sort of like after the Civil War, tailing off into, like, I guess you'd call Reconstruction times, right?
Okay.
So Hennessy, he eventually, as a metropolitan policeman, gets murdered by a co-policeman. His name was Arthur Goering.
Okay.
In around 1869. So early on,
right.
He gets murdered by that co-policeman. There was a lot of corruption going on. But Arthur Goering does that. Uh, David Hennessy passes away, murdered, and at this time the population was around 160 some thousand people in New Orleans. Okay. So that's kind of like the number of people there, and you had people from all walks of life. You had, well, there was no more slavery. You had free men, right, that used to be slaves. You had prior people that had freedom status. You had people from different populations, including, well, from everywhere: France, Canada, Spanish people from all over the place, Italian people. You just had all that. And you also had religions like the ones we know, Catholic and Protestants and whatnot. So his son was very young, and he ends up becoming a policeman as well. But he starts off as a very young teenager, and what ends up happening is that he's very good at chasing criminals, dragging them back to the jail, and at an early age, he's seen as very good. He started off as like a messenger guy, kid, and then by age 20, let me see if I get, yes, by age 20, he becomes a detective. By age 20, dude. His name was David Hennessy Jr.
Okay.
He became a detective, so in New Orleans. Okay. So that is like a big deal, okay? So he became very famous, incidentally. So David ends up with a few of his cousins, which were originally from other parts of the country. They set about, kind of like the 1930s, you know, these movies that we see about Al Capone and bringing down the mob.
Yeah.
He did likewise in the 1800s, and there were factions of Italian people that came from Sicily and other parts of Italy, but from Sicily, that installed themselves in New Orleans since the mid 1800s. And so on during the time of the Civil War, and even before, and even centuries before. But there was an influx during this time due to, you know, the conditions and poverty throughout Europe, especially in that area, and they would end up there. But the Italian mob, see, this is another angle to this story. This is at the time existed into antiquity. They came over even earlier than the movies that we see on TV. A lot of us think of, you know, 1930s onward mobs, but we don't think of 1800s and stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is like ancient stuff. Not really ancient, but you get my point. So David Hennessy, son of this, you know, very famous and very career-led David Hennessy Sr., also becomes, you know, involved in government as a police officer, and he's good at what he does. He busts a Giuseppe Esposito, which was a Sicilian crime member who hailed from Sicily and had immigrated to New Orleans. And he busts him, and he's part of this huge chain in New Orleans at the time. So he busts him. They lock his butt away, and he, you know, he continues on. I'm sorry, they don't. Forgive me. They don't. Yeah, they lock his butt away, and that makes headlines across the nation.
Okay.
And he becomes very famous. Hennessy does, his son, Hennessy Jr. Very famous across the nation in print and whatnot. They say this nice, you know, Irish man from an Irish family, successful, batting down on crime and so on. So let me see if I go in the headlines. Okay, so right off the heels of that event happening, and by the way, this is part of the story, there was rumblings of negativity which is a theme we see today and we've seen throughout, history. But this happens to have that, and I found parallels loosely, which we won't get into, but right now. In the papers, there was starting to be rumblings of discontent towards Italian people coming over. Okay. So there was a little bit of that, and there was this whole image of let's clean up the streets, right? In that time. So there was these murmurings written about in actual papers. But right after that success of capturing that criminal, which, by the way, over in Europe was wanted for like chopping off ears of people and all sorts of stuff that were like canonized in newspapers and written. Hennessy is charged with the murder. David Hennessy, this clean, outstanding member of society, is charged with murder of a co-detective who were both candidates at the same time for chief of police. Earlier, the reason that this guy gets the job, David Hennessy, is because the new mayor of New Orleans hires him due to his good reputation to clean up the police force, which also in the papers had disturbing, news about corruption. There was corruption. It was corruption. They didn't have, a handle on it, and there was corruption. He actually did kill this guy. I think his name, I can't say it. It's like a sort of French thing, but Devenu, probably
Okay.
Devenu. This gentleman Thomas Devenu, he was vibing for the same position, gets killed. Trials were held, and due to his testimony and his leaning on, we're talking about David Hennessy, leaning on the fact that, and this is key, that he was acting in self-defense, which makes me think that I read this within the last 3 hours. He was in a fight with this guy, and they were probably vibing for the same job. I'm assuming these things. I don't want to get into it, but the point is that leaves us a little bit of a clue that it wasn't that he just murdered him for murdering him. There was probably some sort of brawl, and like, it's my job, no, it's mine, and they ended up like that.
Yeah.
With Hennessy, taking the victory and surviving. So he's acquitted. Hennessy's acquitted. And so it's an insane story. So going forward in time, on October 15, 1890, David Hennessy's walking from work in New Orleans back to his home, and he gets gunned down in the street. Gunned down in the street. But Hennessy was a badass. I mean, no doubt about, he was a badass. So he ends up, after being shot, taking a gun, firing at the victims, chasing them until he collapsed, and firing at the victims, firing at the assailants until he collapses. People rush to him, and he's on the floor, collapsed, and they say, "Who did this? Who did this?" And he said, quote, "Diego's shot me," unquote. Diego's. So, pause right there in the story. That's the first half of the story.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts at the?
I have questions.
Okay, let's leave. Can we leave them or should we? Because I want to. Should we stop and answer those, or should we finish?
Let's. This is a lot to digest.
Okay, so let me just say this. This is roughly the halfway mark of the story. It's like curtain down, intermission. Literally, I stopped it there in my writing because there's a break in the situation. So
Okay.
we'll do that.
Okay. So Hennessy Jr. moves up into detective status and didn't rest on his laurels. I mean, he continues his fight to clean up New Orleans.
Yes.
Okay. Then he becomes chief of police or police commissioner, one or the other. I'm still kind of fuzzy on that. And is now in charge of cleaning up the city and trying to take down organized crime, etc., etc. That's when he gets gunned down. About,
Okay. So
about how old was he then? He'd been on the job for a while. If this is the 1890s,
yeah, this is 1890. I'll tell you exactly 1890. He was
okay,
shot down October 1890.
okay,
His dad, just to put it in context, I'm sure his dad was killed in 1869.
okay.
And
So
following 1869, right around, I want to say 1870, after his father dies, what is becoming clear is that he ends up as a kid.
mhm.
I don't want to ponder what a kid's mind would be after your dad, just all these things, but very early on, I'm coming to the conclusion that he started with the police force, maybe because he was associated with his father's, the
Yeah,
adults around his life. But I don't want to get into that but yes, there's a close
okay,
association. So I believe early on, as he
okay,
grew at the age of 20, he became lead detective.
okay. So there was 21 years between the time his dad was killed and the time that he was gunned down. Uh oh, uh oh. We'll just wait for him to pop back in. I'm sure he hit the wrong button. He'll be right back. Dum 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 dum. We'll wait on Eloy. I'm so glad it's his edit. There he is. Gave yourself the whammy, Bar.
I pressed once to move a window, and it did a double click.
No, no. Okay. So 21 years passed between the time his father was killed and the time that he was gunned down. So, okay, that settles that. All right. That now I've got it straight in my mind. And he told the crowd, the Diego shot me.
So one evening, so after all this success, and we don't know all, so I didn't go into, because there's too many branches to go into, but we know that he had a lot of success after he arrested this one criminal guy, the Exposito guy,
Mhm.
and that in the papers across America, I mean, from New York to everywhere, they published that success in New Orleans and stuff, because it was one of the major cities,
Right.
you know, back then.
Right.
I mean, it's still a major city, but you get what I'm saying. Like back
I
then,
do.
it
Yeah.
was like, we didn't have necessarily the population size that we. And so, on the heels of all that success, he's walking home one day, and then this hit on him occurs, hearkening to something we would never necessarily, we wouldn't place in the 1890s. We would place it probably starting in the 1830s or 1820s, 1830s, and on throughout the 60s and 80s to that. You know what I'm saying? Like that whole mafia angle.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. 1930s, 1920s. Okay.
Right. We wouldn't place this sort of mafia
Right.
experience in that era necessarily. We know, or I know, and many people know that there's a tradition that goes into the distant past, but we don't. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We don't think of
You don't associate mob activity with New Orleans in the 1800s. No.
you don't.
So, okay. I'm clear now. We can pick up where you left off.
Okay, so well, so let me expand on this. Is a sidebar. This is okay, so in my notes I wrote this is a snapshot sidebar of culture in Louisiana, at the time, and across the nation, this sentiment was expressed in newspapers.
Okay.
Okay, and that's going to, this is also a side route within the story before I get back to the story, which I left as an intermediate, I guess, mid break or whatnot. So the Diego thing, I don't know how many people out there are aware, maybe more than that I would know, but Diego is sort of like a derogatory name for Italians, Italian immigrants and Italians, and to a lesser degree, the Spanish, okay, as well. It's interconnected, so it's a derogatory thing, and we're looking, and he mentions that as he's shot, and then falls and collapses after he chased them and did what he did. That people come to him, and this is the quote that came attached to. And by the way, he didn't die that moment. He was taken to a hospital, and then the next day is when David Hennessy finally succumbs due to complications and whatnot. But he survived. He held on, through the night, and into the day. I don't know how long. I guess we could get into looking for it. But so he has this quote, and so we have this Diego thing, and I found it interesting. So I went in and looked, and so it's a derogatory name and whatnot towards these people. And I do want to mention that Italians, because there's also the Italian story. Italians immigrated to New Orleans after the Civil War because, well, the conditions in their country, and particularly Sicilians came to that to New Orleans because the conditions and available, just work and whatnot, it was not good. So they end up there, and it happens on the heels of the end of the Civil War, because now you have freed slaves that are now free men. Production, you don't have the control over your employees, let's say, anymore. So you need to fill those gaps in labor, and they were quite willing to do this job. So they're coming in, and they're buying land. They're starting their own side businesses. They're working in the fields. Italian Americans, they're doing all this, but to the chagrin of the locals, they intermingle with the blacks. They do business with the blacks. And this is after the Civil War, they even marry and have relationships with and gather and live in the same, like they have no problem buying next to, African American. They're doing all these things that is contrary to just the norm that white folks are used to, let's say. And these people, what are they doing? So there starts to be in the newspapers derogatory stuff going on about Italians, and in particular Southern Italians, and just, so there's this whole thing going on. And so the reason I added that note is that this is a whole other angle, but the fact that he said that quote was later in investigation and stuff, was not found to be concrete, but there was a local animosity towards these Italians and the things that they were doing. And that attitude was pervasive in New York as well and whatnot. So he said Diego in his last throws. And so I just wanted to go into that angle a little bit, and then go into, one other thing. In print, one of many, in national print, out of many, they said in print, Italians are, quote, links in a descending chain of evolution, unquote.
What? Holy cow.
Links in, no, but how can you say something so derogatory and yet so classy? It's so incredible. So they said stuff. So there was a sentiment, right? just note that for half a second, because this leads to the end of this adventure, which is insanity. Because it gets worse or better depending on how you look at it. So back to the murder. It was widely believed that the killers were Italian, due to the fact that there was a presence there, and there was the thing of like Diego's, all this stuff together. I don't know. It's more probable than not, but you know what I'm saying? We don't.
Yeah.
It is what it is. So, it was widely believed that his killers were Italians. The local paper at the time was called the Times Democrat, right? And another paper quoted the Diego quote with the murder, published it, and then immediately after, there were mass. Let me see. So there was mass arrests of Italians locally in New Orleans. Mass arrests. Like, we're talking Wild West. Like, okay, we got to round them up and stuff. And this just informs as to how law can be bent. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm sure there was a descending scale of things law could do. But since we're talking about that time, and I would even say that in this time, people do whatever they want. But at the time, it didn't seem necessarily legal, but they went ahead and did that. Mass arrest of Italians. And let me see, the mayor, his name was Shakespeare, which is great. He was just a hater on anybody that's not part of the group, right? So he did not like the Italians by any stretch of the imagination. And he was quoted in the paper as saying, he was quoted in the paper saying, "Scour the whole neighborhood, arrest every Italian you come across." That's a quote from the paper. And then within 24 hours, they had arrested like 45 people. Some people say even more. There were more Italians there. But that's what they did. And eventually 19 people were figured in being a part of the slaying of David Hennessy. Okay. Again, a person that did all this good, that we know of. He was involved in one murder, but he was exonerated because it was a self-defense thing. Nobody wants that, but it seemed like corruption flowed it seems like corruption flowed in New Orleans in the 1800s, and I could assume even earlier by the accounts that this simple sort of investigation has brought. I find interesting. So 19 were indicted, and so they went to trial, and they were all acquitted. Most of them were acquitted, and some because it was a mistrial.
Okay.
They simply did not have the evidence,
right,
to say that yes, but the heat was on, because the papers, not only in New Orleans but in New York and across the country, were publishing disparaging words about this particular community, with the derogatory, like something you wouldn't hear nowadays, where they just splash a derogatory attached to, like, a community or something like that. You won't hear that in the paper necessarily, right? At all, probably. They had no problem to not do that back then. So they say a bunch of Diegos over there went over, and as according to the Times. Well, this festered, and this is what happens. On the heels of the acquittal, the newspaper published another thing saying, and this is another third leg of this story, is the influence of media, which is another theme that today we have revisited in today's time. You know what I'm saying? Like we have that in current events, where media can say a few key things, and then all of a sudden, so there's a few things. That's why I said at the beginning, there's a few themes. So the paper printed, in accordance to these supposed guilty, now found innocent people to gather, the public, the locals to gather, saying, "Rise, people of New Orleans! Alien hands of oath-bound assassins have set a blot on our, patriarch, on our martyr." And so and it's like a blot on our society, our civilization, and so on. And so let us gather. And sure enough, the following day, thousands of people, thousands of locals were gathered by the prison in the parish, screaming and mobbing. They broke into the prison. Huge mob. The 19 guys, Italians in there that were innocent, according to the court, the standard of, well, they broke in and said, "We're going to do Old West justice." I'm adding Old West justice, but that's kind of what it is, because it's a mob,
Yeah,
right? And
it's mob rules, yeah.
They went in and murdered the 19 Italians, some with clubs, clubbing them to death, others hanging them from lampposts, and others simply by gunshots. All of them. Now, with that said, after that occurred, there were attempts to clean it up legally. Many of the people in that mob became senators, Congress people, and whatnot, of the specific in that mob. So there's more stories to go that actually participate in, but in the weeks and days and months and years that followed, no one was ever prosecuted for that crime that was committed. Not only did, and a lot of investigations, not only did the original David Hennessy murder still was a mystery, although suspicion existed, but the murder of these people, which were like fruit stand sellers. These Italians were like, some were fruit stand sellers, some were like just all sorts of stuff. Yes, there were criminals as well, but it was a disparaging, different variety. You know what I'm saying? It was that different groups of people with, or different, disciplines within this group of people. And so that's the end of the little presentation. Also, David Hennessy's, I guess, monument plaque rests in one of the cemeteries in New Orleans to this day, and it sits on there's a little mound, mm-hmm. and there's this sort of obelisk-like, represent or tribute,
mm-hmm. Memorial,
memorial, that sits to this day in New Orleans. It's just ancient, or I keep saying ancient, but this very old cemetery, and it sits there. And so that's the presentation.
Okay, so basically, the media incited a riot and incited a crowd to take justice into its own hands. And as a result, 19 people who were found innocent were murdered. And nobody was held accountable for it. Nobody was arrested. There were no trials. There were no convictions. Nothing. Right?
No. Well, the first part, I can't lay blame just on the media, because it takes a village.
You're right. It does take a village, but the people with the loudest bullhorn get the most attention. So was this seen as quote unquote justice? Did things calm down in New Orleans after the 19 were killed? or were there still more attacks on Italians and Italian attacks on other people, or did things kind of calm down?
So I haven't gone beyond that
Okay.
that I shared with you.
Okay.
So I can't speak to it. I just know that that was from all the different,
Hmm.
research that I did within the short time, that that was a very poignant moment
Hmm.
within that. Because what it is that I do have, okay, so I have some Italian ancestry, direct Italian ancestry, coming from my father's side, which is mainly, and so I end up oftentimes in Louisiana when doing research because I'm trying to figure out if, well, maybe did they take a route over here and stop here, and so you inevitably end up like, oh, wait a
Right.
second, this is weird, and you go in there, and all of a sudden you end up. So that's how come I ended up in this where I did, and I found it too cool or cool. You know what I mean? Historically,
Interesting.
um, yeah, and it's an American story. It's powerful. It has so many different, gosh, Civil War involved, Reconstruction era involved, people, just a whole litany of different
Corruption.
corruption.
Corruption 100%. I mean, and New Orleans in particular, and southern Louisiana in general, is known for corruption. I mean, and that spread all the way into the 20th century without, getting, without walking on dangerous ground. I'll say that it was up to the middle of the 20th century that we know of for sure. I mean, there were trials where people were convicted. Beyond that, I'll remain silent. Um, but you're kind of hesitant to lay blame on the media, and I won't blame 100% blame, but I will lay partial blame because, as I said before, the loudest bullhorn gets the attention. And when we're talking about today how the media can control this and the media can control that, while it is true, their influence is less today than it was back then, mainly because people have so many other options and so many other choices. You know, when was the last time you watched well, pick any of the alphabet networks? When was the last time you watched their evening newscast? I can't
No,
remember the last time I watched them. Now, there are a lot of people that still do, but a lot of people are like us. I would say an equal, maybe a greater number are like us and they don't watch that. They get their news from other sources. With as many options as we have now, their hold on the information they control is becoming less and less. But back then, that was the only way you got your news. You got your news through either the newspaper or a telegraph from somebody else or a traveler that came to visit. So when a press does something like what you're saying, they beat on the drum, we got to stand up, we got to clean up our streets, we got to take action. The mob that came down upon that jail is not a surprise. At the time, I can't quote what the incitement laws were, but heads would roll if something like that were to happen today. Yes, we have a free press, but a free press does not give you license to incite a mob. That's been established,
yeah,
in court.
yeah,
I tend to blame the press a little bit more, well, a lot more than you do, simply because the power that these people hold in some ways is even more absolute than the people in government, because with just a few words, they can shift public opinion and take down those people in government. It's been done. Yeah, I'll get off my soapbox on that.
No,
I've gone on record several times to give my
no,
opinion of the press. So
I think that so I understand what you're saying about the press. So they've got this bullhorn, and the information travels quickly everywhere because, well, that's the mechanism that they control. And if they have an ulterior motive, it's going to appear in that paper, and people will see it and read it. But I think to myself other things too. And I'm thinking to myself, and so we're just looking back at a situation that, even though we're looking back, there's a lot of things that we can parallel today with human beings in their behavior and with newspapers and their behavior. There's a lot of parallels because, after all, at the end of the day, we're humans, and and we're in different times, but there's a few constants that remain, just like the brain and just a bunch of things. So I think to myself, although variables have changed as well, but
Sure.
there's a lot of continuity. I think to myself as well, right, that if you're a Christian in 1890, now this might be naive, but it begs the question then, what the heck is religion then and Christian? But if you're a Protestant in 1890, you don't lynch people. I mean, they did, but that's not the point. A regular family, mom, dad, the kids, you don't just go and lynch people. That's not step 1. That's not even step 9. So regardless of what the newspaper, now I can see the temptation of those scumbags coming over here and creating a mess of our society. I can see that as point 1, 2, or 3, incrementing. The crossing the line is when someone commits an actual thing. Like, if I see somebody on my farm stealing cattle, you've crossed the line. Now we're talking. But if it's like not that, or interrupting my wife's passage down New Orleans Street or whatnot, the French Quarter, or harassment, or I won't get, so everything is, so I don't, so I think that this problem that you are mentioning about the power of media is one of the biggest factors, because it's you can't get around the fact that it's a big factor. Whatever they say, most people feel trusting towards
right.
back then and even now, except now you wouldn't see that. Well, it's a weird thing. I don't want to raise parallel. This is the last thing I'll say about this, and I don't want to say exactly what I'm thinking, because it would impact a whole can of worms. But I was about to say, I'll leave it with this for everybody. I was about to say, well, you wouldn't have that now. Actually, I did say that, where people then take a cue from media. But that's not true, because
Exactly.
there is a parallel. I'll leave it at that for now. It might not be everything on par to the T. That's not what I'm looking at.
Yet.
It will take a mind processing to see, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay. You wouldn't see that yet. When people are pushed to a certain point, or perceived, if they've perceived they've been pushed to a certain point, you don't know what action they're going to take. And that's what incitement entails, is that constant drumbeat of this. Doesn't matter what this is. The constant drumbeat of this. You tell the lie often enough, it becomes the truth. Every society has had a scapegoat. They've had somebody has been the cause of all their problems. We know a lot worse happened before that incident. We know a lot worse happened after that incident. But it's just one more example of why it's so important and why I harp on it all the time that we teach our kids to think for themselves and do not accept any one single source. Think for yourself. And you're asking, how could Christians do such a thing? I ask how anybody could do such a thing, but it's very easy for us to look at the 19th century with 21st century eyes. I'm not excusing anything anybody did. Their thought processes, their way of life was completely different to what ours is now. What they did is inexcusable. What they wanted to do was inexcusable. There's no reason for it. There is no excuse for it. All I'm saying is their way of looking at life, their way of looking at their worldview was completely different from ours. I mean, how could any Christian think that they had the power or the right to own a fellow human being? You know, so it didn't even start with this. It started way back. You know, it, I don't know. I'm not making any sense right now, even to
No, I
myself.
see where you're going.
Their worldview was completely different from ours. All we can do right now is make sure A, it never happens again. B, that people are held accountable. Those responsible are held accountable. And the only way we can do that is to teach our kids and our grandkids. Mob mentality. I mean, there have been studies and studies and papers done on the mob mentality and how people can get swept up into a group and do things they would never think about doing.
No, but
But
I gotta say, well, go ahead, but I gotta say something that comes to mind from all that.
okay, but to read it in the seclusion of your house that morning with breakfast and decide, yeah, damn it, we got to take action. I'm going down there. Or was it people rounding up friends? You know, we don't know exactly how things happened. The fact that I don't know how hard they investigated, but the fact that nobody was even arrested for it, let alone prosecuted, tells me they didn't want the problem solved.
Well,
That's the major problem.
remember these people were European people. Okay. And yet this happened to them. Whereas, like you said, before that was happening to people of African origin due to the continental slave trade and whatnot.
Yeah.
At least these people, and they got hanged from lampposts and so on and so forth. At least I'm talking about these Italians.
Mm-hmm.
But at least these people had sort of the European, because they even wrote about it. I read a little. I didn't get into this, but they were in papers. They said, yes, those are the lesser Europeans. Those are of the lesser white people, and we hear that to this day. That concept is the same damn thing. And no matter how you try to explain, well, no, listen, this is no, it's categorization. Now, here's the thing. Going to what you were saying about that I had said, the Christian thing. and teaching children. I agree with that. If we teach our children to be kind, generous, thinking, independent, and all this, but not everybody can be that.
Right.
Like not everybody. Like
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
I'm not Elon Musk. I'm Eloy Just. I'm Eloy, just Eloy. I'm not Elon. I'm Eloy. But so like not everybody can be everybody, and that's just what we have to deal with. But
True.
here's what I was gonna say when you had said those things. I'm thinking to myself this. Fair enough, it was another time, and because it was. But I'm thinking to myself this, and we've talked about this before. If you and I were back then in that time and so on and so forth. No, scrap that, because that's going to be a difficult one.
Yeah.
I'll ask this. I think it's a reasonable question. And we have evidence of it, but I want to see what you think. In that era, or any era before it, you had people that were different, even within an era, that might have been more pacifist, more conscientious, more aggressive, more independently minded, more of a bohemian, more of a and that's how come we had abolitionists and all sorts of people that were going against the certain tides and whatnot. So what I'm trying to say is that here's what I'm trying to say in one way. That mob, and you can't say that you will ever never get caught up in a situation of mob like thing. I can't say, I'm not going to say you. I can't say, I can say that I think that I'm aware of the mob thing is bad idea. But since I'm a human being and liable to fault in every way that human beings are capable of, because I'm part of the human being existence, I understand that I'm capable of all sorts of errors.
Sure.
People today that go into the burning and looting of cities and so on and so forth for a cause or for the blame of one specific thing, whether it's today, yesterday, back into antiquity, whether it's witchcraft with the people from whatever the heck the thing, I have the assumption, which I think is based on reason, that most people aren't going to go for that, but you are having a sufficient amount that are going to do some bad stuff because they follow the tides. But see, I don't want to say most people. I'm saying there's a balance of people that won't go for Old West justice, but there's always going to exist people that want their goodies taken care of right now, and they will kill and slash and blame people that don't need to. It will always exist because we have all the. You see where I'm getting
I
at.
do. I do. And I agree. And that's why it's up to us as individuals. And now we can only do what we can do. I can only teach my kids. I can't really teach my grandkids because I'm not with them 24/7 the way their parents are. I can help their parents. I can kind of guide in one direction or another, but ultimately it's up to the child. You're talking about getting caught up in the mob mentality. I don't like big groups. If I see something like that, I'm gone because you're absolutely right. Nothing good is going to come from it. I see a bunch of people starting to gather together. I know it's my turn to change my zip code. I got to get out of there because nothing good is going to come. Just the laws of self-preservation. Not only that, protecting my wife, who's a better shot than I am. But that's beside the point. I won't let myself get put into that position if I have my say. Now, if I get caught up in something, unbeknownst to me, it's up to me to get us the heck out of there. And that's what I'm going to try to do. There are just always going to be bad people. And we touched on this once before. I don't think there are more bad people today. I think it's just easier to see them, easier to identify them. And they come out of the woodwork on their own. It's easier to document them.
There are more bad people, though. because of
Well,
sheer population size.
well, yes, but I
Okay.
mean per capita, you can't say, 5 out of 100 was bad in 1850 and now 75 out of 100 is bad today. I don't think
Right.
it's that much. It's just, you're
Right.
right. In sheer numbers, we have 330 million people in this country.
We have
A
more bad
certain
people. Yeah.
a certain percentage of them are bad, and that's been true since time immemorial.
Yeah.
But they're easier to see now. And the louder the bullhorn, the more attention you get. So the people out screaming in the streets are going to get the attention, but only because the people in the press want them to have that attention. You know, when I was a kid growing up in the 60s and Vietnam War protests were the big thing, there was a poster that said, "What if they had a war and nobody came?" Well, let's update that into a 2000 versions. What if they had a protest riot and nobody came? I know, both a pipe dream, but maybe it's kind of that it doesn't work. You would think that they would learn by now that that kind of thing doesn't work. All it does is condemn your cause from the get go.
The so okay, so yeah, so I look at the press as an arm of a larger thing, where you have, so there's religion involved too. We so I've not completed the analysis, and I've been studying this actually for maybe like over a month, or just about a month, maybe more, actually more, but I've not gotten to any point where I can, really sit down and lay it out. But there seems to be a huge continuum problem under, it's huge, but it's under the waters between different factions in terms of religion on one category. Um, so even today, where people are like, I don't believe in religion and this and other people are like, nah, because you gotta praise the, you have all these things, but under the waters of that, we are passengers on a train that is going through history. Even today, as we sit, we're actually traveling down this train, and we've compiled many truisms, or factoids that are deposited in our little, satchel, that we may not be aware of. Some are, some not, maybe something. So religion, and I'm not downing religion, by the way, but this is one aspect. So I'm not downing religion, but I'm just observing, and I haven't concluded the thing. You have your Catholic traditionally going into antiquity,
Mm-hmm.
and it just so happens, I have not completed this analysis, but it just so happens that all of Southern Europe and Northwestern Europe was on the same page up until one point, until it became a Protestant and Catholic situation. From that series of events, which includes geopolitics and all sorts of things, you had a lot of contention between territories, and it was spurred on by the King of England wanting to marry. It just a whole litany of things. But those ideals and variations and differences made their way to the New World in a striking parallel to what was found in the Old World. In the New World, um, in North America, in the United States, let's say, or the colonies, before this was formed into a country, there was already a 100 or 200, 300, whatever the time frame of Protestantism that was quite suspect of the Catholics for good reasons in some cases. But was also used as a political tool. So
Right.
what ends up happening is, and again, I've not laid the landscape perfectly. In England, when a Spanish queen controlled England, she was an English queen, but she was actually a Spanish queen. She was very Catholic, and she wanted to propagate the Catholic situation or bring it back. And there was a lot of hangings and burnings and so on and so forth. There was a lot of problems there, and there was a lot of Protestants. There was a lot of Catholics that wanted to bring it back, and it was all power play and religious conviction. But there was problems there. The rest of Northwestern Europe got hold of the Protestantism, and factions were drawn and whatnot. So that traveled here in our undercarriage compartment in our little trains throughout time. And there's assumptions and beliefs and things that we carry with us in a very subtle way. We are modern people of our time, but we are passengers in the train of history. So there's a lot of things that are just floating around there. So there is this Protestant and Catholic sort of like butting heads thing undertow that we're not all necessarily every day aware of, but there is that. And so these Italians that came here as an example, and the Irish before them were actually subject to in the time before those Italians of that time, the Irish that came were whooped on them because they weren't following the protocol. So there is that angle. I'll just leave it at that.
It's less now than it was way back then, but yeah, there's been a lot of atrocities committed in the name of the true religion, and I'll leave it at that. I think a lot of times it's used as an excuse by evil people to masquerade their evil, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to knock at all the religious thing or either or. I'm not. I'm just saying that it has been through the vehicle of time.
Yes,
but it's also due to people in power in their proper times utilizing the tools at their disposal to propagate what is going to make a win for them in this huge game of nation building, monopoly, and whatnot. And the people are passengers, and we assume a lot of beliefs, not in a direct way, sometimes yes, but in a very undercurrent way that just happen to be acceptable. That this is so, there was, and they did mention in papers and stuff, this whole Catholic thing, apostate thing, just all these things. So there is undertones of that as well. I just wanted to,
and
but
I
don't want to say I blame the
No. Again, it comes back down to the people with the loudest bullhorn. And if you want to make something about something, you can. I mean, if you want to make it, if the press wants to make it about religion, they can. If they want to make it about race, they can. If they want to make it about gender, they can. They have the biggest bullhorn. They have the loudest bullhorn. And some of us eagerly wait in line to be fed. Well, what does this newscaster say? What does that newscaster say?
But I will say this though, Mark, I will say this. It is not this is aside the normal thing to do as a human being that's born in this world in our time before when we were kids. The general normal, meaning the majority, the standard is what I'm defining normal as, is that you're born into this world and the steps that are given for you to progress is a chain of different things, and you follow those things, and there's trusted voices and there's non-trusted voices, and so the normal thing is to believe and trust in our institutions, and I don't live in that world in my brain.
No, see, again, I was not taught to believe and trust in those institutions. I was taught to think for myself. Without knowing it, they were teaching me rational thought without using those words.
Yeah.
In that, think for myself and don't trust any one source, because just because you like the looks of somebody or you like their voice doesn't mean that they're right. And we have history over and over and over again that proves that. I was taught to be skeptical. Listen, but be skeptical and check it out for myself as well as I could. And don't believe any one source. And I keep coming back to that simply because we as people will gravitate towards the source we find the most comfortable, convenient, the most pleasing. And we get complacent in that we trust that that source is always going to be correct. People make mistakes every day. A comma or a period in the wrong place in a news copy can condemn an innocent person or release a guilty person. People are people. They make mistakes. We have to expect that. But a continued line of intentional guidance in a certain direction is unacceptable. To me, that's the abuse of a free press. And the only way they can be held accountable is if you can prove there was malice behind their story, their headline, or their worldview. If you can prove there was malice, then there is you have legal recourse. But with that, and I'm quoting law, absence of malice, they can say anything they want.
So yeah, right. I will say sometimes it happens because we're in the conversation. If I think to myself briefly, I haven't delved, but if I think to myself of the 1840s guy living somewhere in America that has the notion, talking about this, not your standard thinking, like outside of the box, not following there's, if you think of these people that were like emancipators, that were, they're like, this doesn't work. It's not ethical. It's not moral. And talking about slavery,
right?
It's not my conscience. I'm assuming that this is what they would go through on some level. My conscience doesn't justify this scenario, and therefore we will oppose it.
Right.
It's one thing to oppose it that way by thinking it, and it's a whole nother thing to what some of these guys did, these people did.
That's true.
Because they went out and put their money where their mouths were.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
people died.
And they also killed people, because there's a lot of
people died as a result of them putting their money where their mouth is.
Right. So to think about that, this was their lifetime.
Yeah.
And this is what they chose to do according to the provisions that were offered them within their life. That is something that is often sort of just like washed away some
that's because
100 and something years ago or more, right?
200. Several generations have come and gone, and it's been over, not quite 150 years.
170 years.
Yeah. And
roughly.
But generations have come and gone, and they have accepted the notion that the end justifies the means. And while some will say that this was the most noble of causes and that maybe those people should have died, it wasn't always the bad guy that died. So a lot of times it was the innocent that died. We can't change what happened. We can't change what was. All that we can do is we can learn from it, make sure it never happens again, and keep teaching our kids about it so that they don't forget and so that they know not to make those same mistakes. I mean, there are good people out there, there are bad people out there, and there always will be. Watch your back. I mean, the world is a rough place. Wear a cut.
I think we should end on those words. Those are excellent. It's an excellent bookmark to place on this episode. Um, so I want to thank you guys for hanging out. We do have an after show, but I do want to mention that we go live every Tuesday at 6:30 on the West Coast and 9:30 on the East Coast. That's Trampled Underfoot Podcast on YouTube. We also have a website, which is trampledunderfootpodcast.com, and you can catch our past episodes over there. There's a button, and you can press the Wayback Machine button, where we have our past episodes cataloged over there. And we do have a Facebook page that we place our just pictures and links and videos and stuff according to whatever we talk about and discover. So I do want to thank you guys for hanging out. We're also sponsored by
Steve Nealon at Harneal Media. Harneal Media specializes in web design and web hosting for makers and the makers community, but you do not have to be a maker to partake of Steve's services. He's got you covered. If you're a seasoned veteran and you've designed websites all your life and you just need a web host, Steve is your man. If you are a total newbie like me and don't know what you're doing with a website, Steve is your man. He will do as much or as little as you need for him to do. Excellent service. When you speak with Harneal Media, you are speaking with Steve. I don't think the man ever sleeps because he's on top of it 24/7. You can find out more at Harneal Media. That's HARNEAL Media.com. Sponsor of Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll catch you next week here at 7. What is it? Boy, I screwed that up. We'll catch you next week right over here, Tuesday, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. See ya.
Peace. I was wondering if you're going for a full 30 seconds.
You know how many little lines that audio thing has? It's like impossible, dude. So how was that, Mark? I think it was.
You did it to me again. You got heavy. That's okay.
It was heavy, but wasn't it multi?
You know what?
Multi-layered though.
It was, and you're right. I never would have thought of that kind of thing back in the from 1850 onward. I wouldn't have thought about mob rule or mob bosses or anything like that.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Let's go down the list and see, can we find and let's get down here. I was teasing people and Steve was bragging about having 4 of his sponsored makers running live streams at the same time.
That's incredible.
I mean, it's rough on him because he monitors the chat in all of them, so that if bots pop into the chat or what have you, and he's there to take care of it. I mean, that's what I mean when I say Steve at Harneal Media. He's Johnny on the spot because I mean he's not only working on websites, because like if they come up with an update to the version of the web hosting program with 100 and some odd or 200 and some or 300 and some odd websites, he's got to go through and make sure all of them get updated properly and that all the plugins are updated properly. He's a busy guy, and he has time to jump over. He doesn't watch, but he does listen for certain cues during the podcast or any of the other live streams that his friends and the people who have websites do. I mean, the guy, I don't know how he lives. I really don't.
I like to think that he was. See, I would have rather not known that, because I would rather want to think that Steve is actually listening to our podcast specifically and focused, in our
No.
conversation, and that ruins my imagery in my head.
Well, I mean, let's see here. What did he say? Yeah, he said this is the first time I've had 4 sponsored live streams on at the same time. Okay. Let's see. And it was Charles Deering scrolling. Midnight Scroller will be turning an egg. Wood Bits and Picks is live on Facebook and us. So that's just 3 of the other ones, going.
My goodness.
Oh, man. And then we had a little bit of banter here. This is apropos of absolutely nothing.
Okay, that's good.
Jim Dockerell says, Mark is late. Hope that doesn't mean preggers. Then my wife had to jump in. If he is Jim, he has some splaining to do. I ain't going to need to do no splaining because we're rich. We are rolling in it.
No, I think that does he mean pregger? Doesn't he mean pregnant?
Yes.
You're late.
If I'm pregnant, I'm rich.
Oh, I see. You're rich because that's going to be a modern human miracle.
Exactly.
And you're going to get lots of show airtime and sell products.
You bet.
Okay, gotcha. Now I see where you were going with that. I was thinking, okay, how does a pregnant guy
you just
make $1?
Easy. Couldn't you just see me selling Huggies or Pampers?
No, and I don't want that.
Or baby bottles, I could go in a million directions.
I'd rather think of you chainsawing some a huge tree or bashing some sort of sea lions as opposed to you in some sort of tender no.
Yeah. Okay.
Or in a cave or I'd rather see you in a cave with one of those panther what is it?
Loincloth?
Caveman. Yeah, loincloth. Sitting next to what's this guy's name? The guitarist that did that?
Ted Nugent,
having a conversation.
Dude, if I hooked up with Ted Nugent, we would both knock on your door wearing loincloths. just to see the look on your face. Rick French pops in and says, when talking about the story,
okay,
this was a Christopher Walken movie years ago. Let me go see if I can find the name.
Okay.
And he did Vendetta from 1999.
Vendetta?
It was a movie. The Hennessy story evidently was a movie.
Oh,
I may have to look into that. Now, I know Eloy, I can see him typing already. He's already going to look into it and see what's going on.
Let me see. It was from what year?
1999. Christopher Walken. I like it when he plays the brooding, moody guy.
Yeah, lynching in American history. Holy smokes, dude. Well, I sounded too excited about that. But the fact that they made a Hollywood movie out of it is freaking cool. I got to check it out.
Yep. I was getting ready to say that your tomorrow evening is figured out for you. We know what you're going to be doing. So let's see here. For a nation of mostly immigrant populations, we have a deplorable history of attacking the next group of immigrants. That's true, Rick. And it's funny. Well, it's not funny, but it's odd.
It's hilarious
that every group has to have another group to look down at. We have to have another group to look down on. We have to have the scapegoat. We have to have the underling. We have to have the person who is beneath, our dignity. And I have never, I'll be 61 years old next month. I have never understood that. I do not get it.
I understand.
Don't get it.
I do understand it.
I think it's not only is it ignorance, I think it's stupidity.
No, but it's not just that. It's not just that. It is, but it's not just that. I think it's very much part of. So if you think about the fact that we are, this is a known thing. We're tribal.
We are.
And the closest tribe, and I'm not going to speak to the fact that we rise above our instincts and stuff. Obviously we do, but I don't see it as strange that population wise or in a broad sense that occurs because there's enough people out there that lean towards that. We all do, but there's enough people that get high on their own supply on believing that that is enough to sway, the path in one direction or
Right.
the other. But more specifically, we're all tribal in that. In my situation, my little dog Vigo is part of my little tribe,
Yeah.
and he's more important to me than the next dog across the street. No matter, I know that dog across the way is super important for those people,
Right.
but my dog is my little tribe, and he comes first. Likewise with children, family, aunts, cousins,
Understood.
and all that.
I agree 100%. But
Well,
that
let me
doesn't.
well, go ahead. Go ahead.
But that doesn't mean that dog across the street is automatically your enemy because he's not a part of your tribe.
Yeah, but of course not. Like I said, that we rise above, but instinctually, we focus on our thing first.
I get it.
So as a base of that, not as a base of that, if you compound that and someone coming in or a group of people coming in that look different, speak different, have different customs, and they're going to take your jobs because they're willing to work for less, and they're going to take up resources, and they act different in their cultivation of their living spaces, and all these sort of like things there's going to be a negativity towards that. But it doesn't mean that it has to be all out war. I get that point that you mentioned, but there's enough people out there that aren't necessarily the most specifically critical thinkers or the most specifically compassionate
And that's
people.
the problem.
There's people that are more mirror facing out than mirror facing in. See, I'm saying more, and that's an assumption. But I think that assumption falls within a range of truism. I could be wrong.
You're right. And I won't say it's most. I won't say that it's less than half. I'll just say that there's too many. And that's why it's up to us. And that's why it's our problem. That's why we have to be the ones to teach our kids and our grandkids that kind of thought, it's that whole getting high on your own supply. You are special to me, but you are not special to the world at large out there. You're going to have to work for everything you acquire. Don't think somebody's going to give it to you. Grandpa will slip you $5 on the side. But that's going to end when you have to go out and be an adult. Because you're going to have to work for everything you hope to acquire. And if the guy next door has a nicer car than you, it's not his fault and it's not the car's fault. Quit coveting what other people have or what you think they have and get your own. There's not a limited supply out there. Go get your own. Along with that comes getting along with your fellow man. They speak a different language. So what? They have different customs. So what? Learn to revel in it and enjoy it. Become a friend. You might learn something. The argument about taking away jobs and things like that is a relevant argument. But my argument has always been, if you are that perilously close to losing a job to somebody who will do it for $1 less an hour than you, that's the market telling you that you need to improve your education or your skills and move up. The higher up you move, the less likely you are to be taken out by somebody who will do it for $1 less an hour. There are certain jobs you're not supposed to make a career out of. That's why they call them entry level.
Yeah, but the problem is that okay, so that specifically is true, but in a grand scheme of things type of view, those categories of threats are, and I'm air quoting here with the threats thing, but in reality, there are threats involved at the same time. Um, you know, or so maybe this is a complicated sort of
It
angle,
is.
but I'll just say this, that it's different now in Sweetwater, where you have a flooding of students from all walks of life. So,
Mm-hmm.
but the category now is students, right? Let's say, um, as opposed to old retirees, let's say,
Okay.
and that's a change,
Sure.
and that's an impact into the area in ways that
Sure.
alter the businesses, the landscape,
Yes.
and all sorts of things. Let's say, so, um, but we were talking about like one group and the other group. This is another type of group, except instead of nationality, we're talking about just like student
Yeah.
to
Age.
residents and whatnot, and age and stuff. So there's all these categories. So we do sort of block into our, so in order to make sense of the world, we do create boxes to hang notes on that say this is this and that's that. That's what separates us from animals. Like, an animal doesn't look at a bookshelf and think that's a bookshelf. They don't even look at it and think anything. It's just an object in the way, and they're going to go ahead and pee on it and mark it theirs and forward, onward, and whatever. Whereas a human can see abstractions, um, and sort of figure out things and sort of contemplate. So it is amazing at the same time, but that humans, even though they're capable of doing all this stuff, well, you see, the problem is that humans also contain this notion of maliciousness in order to gain.
And
That's another
supremacy. And supremacy.
that's another problem. There's the malicious intent. So
Sure.
because we're intelligent and able to conceive of abstractions and categories of things and people and this and that, we also contain in us the ability to do evil. So an animal
Right.
cannot necessarily do, an animal cannot do evil. They do what animals do. They will kill in order to feed themselves. We think of how to kill and how to drape our clothes and our, we are very meticulous in every aspect of the thing. We're tribal at the same time because we're instinctual. So a dog or a pack of animals are part of their little pack and whatnot. Sometimes they eat their own, but they're still part of their little pack. And we do have this sort of duality going on. I don't think it's a fixable thing. And
But it is.
well, let me just say, I don't think it's a fixable thing. I could be wrong. I think that the best we could do is what we have done, which was, on the heels of the country becoming a country, enshrined in it were these rights and these limits to government, and the basics that we were formed with. That structure, where there's court systems and just this process, I think it's the best we could do, and we can tweak here and there, but our fundamentals should always be that you're culpable for your personal actions and
Okay.
whatnot.
And that's what I'm getting at. We don't teach that. We don't teach that there's bad and there's good. We teach
Right.
that there's acceptable and unacceptable. But we don't teach that there's good and there's evil. See, good and bad are comparative, kind of like better and worse. They're comparative.
Yeah.
Good and evil, while they are comparative, that's pretty cut and dry. We have to teach kids, yes, you have all these rights, but you also have these responsibilities. And there is a consequence for your actions and a consequence for your behavior. If we set up our children into believing that life has no consequence and the way to get your way is to jump up and down and pitch a fit, they're going to take that with them into adulthood. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing is people who their entire lives have never been told no with any conviction. They've never had a consequence for their behavior or their action. You see it all the time in the grocery store. You see it all the time in the park or walking down the street. Parents go to the teacher and scream at the teacher because their kid got an F. like the teacher made him fail. No, your kid won't turn in his work. Your kid won't study. Your kid does crappy on tests because he's too busy playing around on his phone that you got him when he was 7 years old. You're not teaching your kid right and wrong. You know, we have spent too many generations believing that there is no consequence. There is no right and wrong. How dare you inflict your morality on me? That's part of the problem. And I don't know that that's the biggest part of the problem, but
It's
if
one.
more people taught their kids that there is a consequence for your actions and there is a consequence for your behavior, both good and bad, I think more kids would get the idea a lot earlier in life. And I think society would be better as a whole.
Yeah, any approach. If you're into the belief of Western civilization, um, and the things that come of it, which a system of law and whatnot, and imperfect as it is, because it is imperfect, and human beings, since we're imperfect, it's just always going to be faulty. But it's kind of like within a range of acceptable or palatable, um, in that that if your neighbor crashes into your car while it's parked outside, there's consequences, and if he refuses,
Mm-hmm.
there is a system and process, or that you can be walking down the street, and there when you're walking down the street that um another person could come and do some horrible thing, but
Well,
that there's a system in place that
but
that states that if this is committed, there are consequences to, like, there's this whole
but
thing that occurs within our society. Go ahead.
but even then it depends on who gets to the lawyer first, because in this country we've set up a society where if the guy who crashed his car into your wall is the first one to file suit because you built a wall there and you shouldn't have built a wall there. Never
Right.
mind the fact that you didn't build the wall and it's been there for 50 years, but you're responsible because it was your wall.
Yeah. No, but it's different, right? Right. There's
So
you can go through in those
when,
things,
when
and granted, but there is something called lynch mob, and
you know,
then
yeah, and
something
I'm not, yeah,
called a structure with some reasonable,
right.
like laws and
I
whatnot.
get it, but what I'm saying is when that becomes acceptable, that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Rick French says the danger of groupthink when groupthink goes political and violent. Absolutely, 100%. Absolutely. On either side. On either side. And that's what I mean. Groupthink and mob mentality, nothing good is ever going to come of it.
But wait a second. What do you mean either side?
On either side. It doesn't matter if you're pro broccoli or anti broccoli. When you get a mob together and start throwing stuff around, nothing good is ever gonna come of it. Nothing.
Okay.
There's just gonna be a lot of broccoli flying through the air. You know. Frankie CNC and Woodworking Channel says I tell my kids there are bad folks in all sides and mistakes made in the past they don't gotta make to learn from themselves. Yes, exactly. You don't have to make these same mistakes to learn it yourself. You know, use their own head to figure out the rest. Yeah, but you got to help guide that head because I mean, I had some weird thoughts when I was younger. I have weird thoughts now. But
you got to think.
Yes, teach them to think on their own. And you're absolutely right in all that. You're absolutely right in all that.
I think that by that statement, by what you just said, which I agree with 100%, you have to think. Now, thinking means running through your brain. You got to do it. You got to do it or not. But I think that if you do it and you try to put like the Django blocks, and try to build that tower, some thoughts lead to the tower collapsing. You say, okay, well, that is what you have to be a little bit more,
Yeah.
intricate with your, with
And
your study of things.
and that's why I say be hardest on your own opinions first, because and be willing to admit to yourself that you just might be wrong. A lot of opinions I had when I was 16 and 17. Oh boy, did I learn the hard way that I was wrong.
You know what? I'm going to tell you something. I can't remember what my opinions were. I can remember the world outside and me experiencing it, but I can't sit down and tell you what was my thought according to this, and that.
Well,
I had just a general, broad sense of being.
you know the deal. I thought that I could do this and I could do that, and I would make my first million by age such and such, and this, that, and the other, and I was going to go on and do all these things. Well, real life just turned around and laughed at me straight in the face and said, no, you're going to do this for a while. Then you're going to do that for a while. Situations come along that try our patience and try those opinions,
Yeah.
and just give you a gut check, But I do stand by my statement that if you're in a job or an occupation that can be threatened by somebody who will do it for $1 an hour less, that is the market telling you that you need to increase your education and your skills and move up. If you are in a job where you don't make enough money, don't demand an increase to the minimum wage. You're not supposed to support a family on the minimum wage. Don't demand an increase to the minimum wage. Educate yourself, improve your skills, and move up. I know
I hate to be.
It's easy for me to say, but if that means getting another job somewhere else, do it. If that means moving, do it. I've lived in 14 states. I've done it. It sucks to move.
Yeah, but
but
there's
I've
a problem.
done it.
There's a problem. And I just want to see what you say about this, because there's
Okay.
a problem with that. There is a problem.
Okay.
If all things being equal, what you're saying, I agree. In other words, somebody comes in and is willing to do it for less and this and that, and that's an indication that I agree with that. If all things are equal. But there's a situation, to be fair, to be fair with all the assumptions that are possible at the moment. What if people are being brought in for a specific thing and it's being placed? So if you get a group of people from, I don't know, whatever, the middle of Cambodia into the little town of Kickapoo, and now they took all the jobs. So, and they're doing that in order to, and it's something extra above extra. It's not on the up and up and stuff. If something's outside of the, if it's a legal thing, and even if it's a legal thing, if you have a small farming community and you bring in 20,000 farmers from Cambodia because you just decided to do that, and you've literally just replaced, to be fair with the arguments you will hear, you've literally replaced the whole town, and everybody and their wives and the goat and the dog better wrap it up and move on, because it's done.
It's not done. I've been in that situation. I used to pick pears for the big orchards here. And what you said absolutely happened. Suddenly, I couldn't get a job picking pears because there was somebody willing, a whole flood of people willing to do it for cheaper than I would. So I applied for other jobs and I got on with another company. I got out of it.
Were they there to do it in a proper fashion, everything on the up and up?
I don't know. I didn't stick around to find out. I said, well, I can't get a job. I got to find something else, because it is seasonal work. But that wasn't all I did. I lit smudge pots and I picked pears and I worked in the warehouse for the cannery and what have you. But eventually I had to get away from that company and get out of that industry because it wasn't paying enough. And it wasn't the cannery's fault. It was the market telling me to improve my education and improve my skills and get out of that position where I wasn't having to pick pears anymore. And I wasn't having to work in the warehouse. It was telling me to do something, blank or get off the pot, because I was content just to keep plugging away at that, complaining about my lot in life. But it took that motivation to make me say, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. Let's go find something else. And I did a few other things. Each one paid a little bit better. There's no law that says you have to stay in the position you currently have. And in a lot of cases, you shouldn't stay in that position. You need to move up. You know, um, it just is. And I'm the son of a guy who was in the grocery business for 35 years. He wouldn't move up, not because he couldn't. He was offered management several times. He didn't want it.
No, but if he doesn't want
he
it,
was
that's good.
he was happy doing what he did, but
That's good enough.
he also knew that he was his biggest roadblock. He was the reason he wasn't making more money every month. He also knew that he was happy and content where he was, and he didn't complain about it.
That's it.
He didn't blame it on the store. That's what I'm getting at. He knew where to attach the blame.
Yeah, but that person,
mm-hmm.
Let's say, so whatever he decided
mm-hmm.
is perfectly fine.
Right.
Whether I believe it's reasonable or not. So if he would have thought that, well, I'm content, that's one thing, fine. If he would have thought, well, I'm halfway content, fine. If he would have thought, I'm not content at all, but I'm not going to do anything about it, fine. If he said, well, I'm going to move, fine. Like whatever people do is fine. Now, when it's not fine is what we've established already, when it crosses that line, which is, I think, very apparent for all of us. But you do see, so the reason I'm bringing up a variation on the theme, although I agree that if you are in a situation and, I better up my game, I get that, and I agree with it. But you do see people thinking, well, wait a second, we've got a flooding into our town from this situation coming from that country, and they're whatever. Even think of on the border, people that live on the border, and you've got a bum rush, and they're literally seeing people walking through their land, crossing over. And so what I'm trying to get at is that we do also live within a gated community called the United States, and there's other gated communities called whatever all around the world, and the people assume that their institutions are focused on them primarily, and because people generally also, there is some care in people's hearts, and they do see the plight of people. I mean, Americans, as an example, are actually you can look at the statistics, are very generous people and do go out of their way to do a lot of good. Doesn't mean that they're all good, and it doesn't mean that everything, that it's just a dynamic thing, because people are complicated. But we do live in a fortification, and then there's that country that lives in their fortification. And the thought is that you take care, like I mentioned, the home first, and then the extra you can go, but you don't go ahead and abandon your home to take care of, Mr. Willy Wonka over there.
Nobody is suggesting you do that. But if, like in my case, when I couldn't get a job that season picking pears, I did something else. Not because I necessarily wanted to, but because I knew I had to. I had obligations. I had a wife and a kid.
What do you mean nobody's suggesting that?
What?
You said that nobody's suggesting that they take care of
that you take care of somebody else before you take care of your own.
You're not saying somebody's suggesting that? That's not laid on the table.
Well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not
saying that's what you're. Okay. I'm speaking to the broad situation of that. It is.
I guess
I don't want to say it's right, but I don't want to say it's right. But I can see how people, you know what I'm saying, would sort of fashion this sort of like us and them tribalism situation. I can see. So I'm just trying to say that instinctual and maybe lack of education mixed in with it. Maybe sometimes not. It's a real thing.
Okay. I can see where that animosity would come from. What I'm saying is I think that animosity is misguided. And I think that animosity is misplaced. Because if you're 54 years old and you're still picking pears for a living, that's not the pear orchard's fault. You know, if you're 46 years old and have 3 kids, you're trying to get through high school, and you're working the drive-through at McDonald's, it's not McDonald's fault. What I'm saying is, seek responsibility, take responsibility for your actions, and get off of the drive-through. Move up. Try to move up. Apply for every flipping job that pays you more that you know you're physically capable of doing. You may just surprise yourself. You may just discover that you are selling yourself so flipping short that you are denying yourself those opportunities. You know?
On the flip side of that, there's also the scenario of, we've said this before as well.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's their fault. I'm using now the flip because I focused on just to look at the landscape. So it's always the other person's fault.
Yes. Yes.
So there's that angle too.
And that's what I mean by accepting the possibility that you could just be wrong.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go ahead and blame those people. Like John Lennon said it perfectly one time. He said, talking about arguments within the Beatles, he says, you know how it is. I'm paraphrasing. He says, you know how it is. It's like we argue, and sometimes it's like, it's you. My life is ruined, and it's you because you're playing that guitar note. And and he said it in such a way that makes you crack up, because he makes a good point with a silly argument that matches so well that people are very petty also.
Oh boy, yes. And they're afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of things, people, cultures that they just don't know. It's different. It's not like them. They're comfy in this nice little cul-de-sac of life, and then all of a sudden somebody moves in next door who plays mariachi music. Please, yesterday you were playing, yesterday you were playing Hank Williams on 11. Don't even try it with me. Not you personally, but you get what I'm saying.
No, but I'm personally saying it's annoying as hell. I can't.
Yes, it is. But you're absolutely right. But what I'm getting at is pot meet kettle, kettle meet pot.
But I have see again. Can I tell you, man? I think.
Okay, we're almost 2 hours and it's your edit, so go ahead.
So I'll tell you this, man. I'll tell you this. So I get it that like there's a lot of hypocrisy and whatnot, and people
that's all
don't self. I get it, but like, okay, I don't want to use an abstract, but at the same time I do, because I don't want to say my specific thing, but but I'll do the specific thing. Screw it.
I know your specific thing if you want to use an abstract.
No, but I'll do it for everybody. Screw it. It doesn't matter. So if you get people playing some stupidly loud, the music can be brilliant. I don't think so, but it could be brilliant. It could be like the most awesome. I don't care if you're freaking like Mozart in the next room. You dumbass. I don't care if like even if it were the Beatles, I'd probably be like, yeah, man. No, but even so, there's also a boundary situation where there is be neighborly. But here's the problem with be neighborly, that it depends. So there is a no, hold on, let me say this. There is a standard or certain standards that are in the guidelines of decent behavior to be neighborly, and then there's that fell off the wayside. My understanding, I'll end it with this, my understanding of what is proper neighborly may not be, depending on how despairingly different the other neighbor is culturally and this and that, whatever the case, it might not be the same. So to them, like there's certain cultures that burping is considered nice while you're eating and other people are like, what? No, don't do it. Just imagine the variety of things we might find not appropriate. And so whatever. So
I
humans
get
are
that.
complicated.
I get that, but you're taking what I'm saying and it's personal, and I know and I understand it.
I'm adding to what you're saying. I'm not
Yes,
using that to
and
contradict you.
no, I get it, but it is as you say. That's why we have laws, and that's why we have standards, and you have legal recourse that you can take. So, but I'm not talking about that situation. I'm talking about the situation where you have a guy who just it's not my neighborhood anymore. You said yourself a minute ago that Sweetwater isn't the same place that it was when you
Mhm.
were a kid, and yeah, I get it. I mean, it couldn't be. Medford is not the same place that I grew up in either, and I learned, boy, you can never go home. You're in that strange situation where you never left.
Right.
Home left. So about all I can say is, and it is the case, and a wiser man than me said it, and I don't remember who it was. It said the only thing that stays the same is that everything is going to change.
Let me break in with this. Just stay with me on this and process it and tell me what you think
Okay.
on this. All things being equal in the
Mm-hmm.
natural progress of, excuse me for saying it, a capitalistic, freedom loving
Mm-hmm.
experience of a country where without fraud and without this and
Mm-hmm.
that, all things being equal, progression in one direction is going to occur, and either or, whether all
Right.
those, but that landscape of a natural progression with people following, within the structure of what the norm is and the laws and the proper thing, that's one thing. But when you have corruption and institutions and things manipulating influxes and distorting business and distorting things in order to acquire what you want, and sort of using those contortions, those in order to shift a small little town in the middle of Kickaboo
Mm-hmm.
in one direction. Um,
Then you,
just the same, that little town is gonna be different in
yes, it
either
is.
cases. But the one case has the element or manipulation of people that are using power and fraudulent,
Okay.
you know. So I'm trying to say that one thing is the normal progress of influx and this and that, and another thing is a manipulation in order to get some
Okay.
advantage down the line that's not in the best interest of
But we,
citizenry, but instead of your bottom line at some point in time.
but we can do 10 hours on that. That's happened time and time and time again. But the end result is always been the same. You got to make the decision. Am I going to stay here and be a part of it and feed that beast, or am I getting the hell out of Dodge? Personally, I got out of Dodge. Let them manipulate what happens in the pear orchards. I don't give a skippy anymore because I'm not involved in the pear orchards. I'm now an apprentice carpenter, and then worked my way up to, well, I was carpenter's helper and worked my way up just starting the apprenticeship when I discovered finish carpentry. So I became a finish carpenter's helper. It was a sideways step in pay. It paid the same amount, but I enjoyed that more than I enjoyed just, framing roofs and what have you. I had to up my game to get the hell out of the pear orchard to begin with. And what it took to get me out of the pear orchard was
There were pears everywhere, weren't there?
no, not anymore. They were all picked.
No,
But it
back
took
then.
but it took the elimination of my position to get me to do it, is what I'm saying. I
Right.
knew I didn't want to pick pears my whole life, but I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grow up. I still don't, truth be told. But it took that motivation to get me to move, both occupationally and physically. I moved to another town so I could be closer to that shop. Now, I say I moved to another town, it was 6 miles, but I
See,
moved nonetheless.
see,
You know,
that's I so listen, listen. I, I I gotta tell you this about what you just said. It's a side thing, but it's important because it's part of it.
hmm
You are where you are at.
hmm
I could bet money on it because you're there,
Mm-hmm.
due to a series of events that were and were not under your control.
Oh, absolutely. We all are.
So yeah, right. We all are, right. So your and mine, not just your, all of ours, our observation of events that led up to where we're at. Obviously, we understand that there's a series of events that some nudged us, some violently, some not so much, and some our own decisions, bad or good. And so we understand this.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know that all we know is that this is where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
So that orchard closing down was a shift because it got you to go in this direction. But you know what I'm saying? So I'm saying
the orchard didn't close down. They hired workers who would do the job cheaper. My position,
dude. The point is that events.
Mm-hmm.
So right now you could be the executive. If not for a series of events, right now you could be the executive of like a coffee grinding milling operation in frickin' Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Without you, because of a series of events took you in that direction for some reason and blah blah blah. And so it's like we are where we're at in all these events and stuff. And so whatever. I observed. It's an obvious thing. But
you're 100% correct about that. But my whole point in all of this is to say that you're the one that's in charge. Ultimately, you decide if you're going to go back to work that day. You decide if you're going to put in that application at someplace else. You decide if you're going to polish up your resume and submit it to 4 or 5 higher paying jobs. You are your own biggest roadblock. Because I can think of a million reasons to not do something.
Yeah, no, and you know what? You can think of a million things because there are a million.
Yeah.
The reason you can think there's a million things to get you not to do what you want to do is because in reality, there's actually a million things that are legit.
But there's only one big thing that's keeping you from doing it, and that is I don't want to.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's
it. Well, I can't because bull. I'll look you dead in the eye and say bull. Whoever told you can't is lying to you. And people don't like to hear that because 99 times out of 100, it's themselves that told them that.
All right, we're gonna stop this now. I think that because we can go on. This is actually very, very good. Even this after show part, very freaking good with all this analysis and thought. And you made me think different things I would not have wanted to, or not wanted to, but like expected to is the better word. But we have to go ahead and stop because we will not stop. We will not stop. So we're gonna stop.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you guys for hanging. Mark, do you have any final words before we?
Daniel said it right there. If everything is easy, nothing's worth effort or thought.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, wait. See, you Dan can't say something like that.
He just did.
Well, yeah, but you can't get away with it. Dan can't. That what he just said. If everything is easy, nothing worth effort. What? Nothing's worth effort or thought. You know what I think? Going to the bathroom. You want to sit on the toilet and make it easy or not?
It took effort. It took effort for you to get up and go to the bathroom. It took thought to make you raise or lower the lid. It took thought to get your drawers down.
Okay. That part. Because I'm thinking to myself, I'm not thinking in the right terms. We're out of here.
Peace, y'all.